Hi, what's going on? I'm doing great. How are things with you?
Okay, so today I'm just gonna ask you a few questions on the topic wood, the backbone of early civilization.
I'm all ears. Which specific civilization are we talking about? Or are you thinking more about the general foundations of how the first ones got?
Okay, so the first question is that what is wood?
Straight to the basics. I love it. In the simplest terms, wood is the hard, fibrous structural tissue found in the stems and roots of trees and other woody plants. It's essentially a giant network of cells that allows a tree to stand tall and move water from the roots up to the leaves. Since you mentioned early civilizations, are you thinking about how they used it for building or maybe for fire?
Okay, so the second question is that how is wood formed in trees?
It's actually a pretty cool process. It all happens in a thin layer just under the bark called the cambium. This layer acts like a tiny factory, producing new cells. Some of these cells become phloem to move food around, but others become xylem, which is the actual wood. As the tree grows, these xylem cells harden and stack up, creating the rings you see when a tree is cut down. Do you want to know how those rings actually tell us the tree's history? It was basically their first real multi tool. First off, fire. Without wood for fuel, they wouldn't have had warmth, protection from predators, or a way to cook food, which actually helped their brains grow. Then there's shelter and tools, everything from the first basic huts to spears and bows. It changed them from just surviving in nature to actually shaping it. I wonder if you're thinking about how they chose which types of wood to use for different things.
Okay, so the next question is that which ancient civilizations relied heavily on wood?
Honestly, almost all of them, but in different ways. The Egyptians relied on it heavily for ships and furniture, even though they had to import a lot of it because they were surrounded by a desert. Then you have the Maya and the Aztecs who used massive amounts of wood to clear land and build their cities. Even the early Mesopotamians needed it for everything from plows to palace beams. Wild how some empires actually collapsed because they cut down too many trees. Want to hear about one of those?
What were the first tools made from wood?
Probably the simplest things first, like digging sticks and basic spears. Long before they were fancy with stone, humans were using sharpened branches to dig for tubers or hunt. They also made things like primitive bows and handles for stone axes, which made those tools way easier to use. It's kind of funny thinking about the very first person who realized a sturdy branch could be a weapon.
Okay, so the next question is that how did wood help people build shelters?
It gave them the first real frame to work with. Instead of just leaning against a cave wall, they could use sturdy logs to create a skeleton for their homes. They'd drive poles into the ground and lean others against them to make a roof, then cover the whole thing with animal skins, mud, or grass to keep the wind out. It basically turned a temporary camp into a home. Do you think you could have survived in one of those?
Okay, so the next question is that why was wood used as fuel in ancient times?
Because it was the most accessible energy source they had. Basically, if you could find it and break it, you could burn it. It was the only way to get consistent heat for warmth and cooking, and it was essential for early metallurgy. You can't smelt metal or make pottery without an incredibly hot fire, and wood was the fuel that made that possible. I bet it's hard for us to imagine now, but for them, a good pile of dry wood was basically like having a full tank of gas. Do you think we've become too dependent on electricity for everything now?
Okay, so the next question I just want to ask you is that how did wood improve transportation?
It was a total game changer. Once people figured out how to hollow out logs, they had the first canoes, which opened up entire river systems for travel and trade. Then the real leap happened when they started using wood for wheels and axles. Suddenly, you weren't just carrying everything on your back. You could move massive amounts of goods and people across land much faster. Basically, shrunk the world for them. Do you want to know about the first types of ships they built?
What is the difference between hardwood and softwood?
It's actually a bit of a trick question. It's not really about how hard the wood is, but about how the tree reproduces. Hardwoods come from deciduous trees, the ones that usually have broad leaves and drop them in the fall, like oak or maple. Softwoods come from conifers, which are usually evergreen trees with needles and cones, like pine or cedar. Some softwoods are actually pretty hard, and some hardwoods are surprisingly soft.
Okay, so the next question is that how did wooden boats change trade?
I think you might mean how did wooden boards change society or
How
how
do
we
how
use
did
trees, right?
how did wooden boats change trade?
I'm a little confused here. Wooden boards don't really change the trees themselves, they're just what happens after a tree is cut down and milled. Do you mean how the demand for boards changed the forests, or maybe how the way
How
we cut
did
them changed the
how
landscape?
did how did wooden boats change trade?
That makes way more sense. Wooden boards were a huge deal for trade because they allowed for standardization. Instead of just lugging around raw logs or irregular chunks of wood, people could create flat, uniform planks. This meant they could build better crates, boxes, and barrels to protect goods during long journeys. And more importantly, they could build much larger and more stable ships. It basically turned shipping from a risky gamble into a real industry. I wonder if you're thinking about how this led to the first big global trade routes.
What role did wood play in farming?
Hmm, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by for me in this context. Are you asking how wood affects your
How
life
what
today? Or
what
maybe
what role did wood play in farming?
it was the engine that kept everything running. Before we had steel or plastic, wood was everything. Farmers used it to build plows to break the soil and fences to keep livestock from wandering off. Even the basic tools for harvesting, like rakes and handles for hoes, were all wood. Plus, they used it to build the first granaries and silos to keep their crops safe from rain and pests. It really turned farming from a struggle into a system. Do you want to know how the invention of the wooden plow specifically changed the way people grew food?
How are wooden plows used in agriculture?
It's a pretty simple but brilliant design. Basically, the plow has a heavy wooden beam and a blade or share that cuts a furrow into the earth. A farmer would pull it, usually with oxen or horses, to flip the soil over. This brought fresh nutrients to the surface and cleared out weeds, which made the ground way more fertile for seeds to actually grow. It was the difference between just scratching the surface of the dirt and actually preparing the land for a massive harvest. Do you think it's wild how such a basic tool basically allowed cities to exist because we could finally grow enough food to feed everyone?
Why were wooden wheels important?
They completely redefined what it meant to move things. Before the wheel, you were limited by what a human or an animal could carry on their back. Once we had wooden wheels, we could move loads that were 10 times heavier without the animal just collapsing from the strain. It made it possible to transport huge stones for building, massive amounts of grain for the city, and even heavy weaponry for armies. It basically took the burden out of long distance travel. Do you think we'd have developed cities as quickly if we were still just hauling everything in baskets?
How did wood help in making furniture?
It turned wood from just a building material into an art form. Once people moved past just survival, they realized wood could be carved, sanded, and joined together. They started creating things that weren't just functional but comfortable and beautiful, like chairs, tables, and beds. It actually changed how people lived. Instead of sleeping on the ground or a mat, they had elevated furniture that kept them away from the damp and the bugs. It's kind of the start of interior design, really. Do you have a favorite piece of wooden furniture, or maybe something you've always wanted?
What ancient weapons were made from wood?
The list is actually pretty long, starting with the basics like spears and clubs. Then you have things like the bow and arrow, which completely changed hunting and warfare because you could hit a target from a distance. There were also wooden shields used for protection, and even early catapults and siege towers used to break into walled cities. It's wild to think that before metal took over, the most dangerous things on a battlefield were basically just really well shaped pieces of a tree. Do you think the bow was the most impactful of those, or maybe the spear?
Okay, so the next question is that why were bows and arrows made with wood?
Because wood has a natural property called elasticity. For a bow to work, you need a material that can bend under a lot of tension without snapping and then spring back instantly to launch the arrow. Certain types of wood, like yew or ash, are perfect for that. They tried using stone or metal back then. It would have either shattered or just stayed bent. It's basically like a giant organic spring. Do you want to know why certain trees were prized more than others for making bows?
What tools are commonly used to shape wood?
It depends on how fancy you want to get, but it usually starts with the basics. You've got axes for the heavy lifting and chopping, and saws for getting those straight lines and boards. Then you move into the detail work with chisels and planes to smooth things out and carve shapes. These days we have power tools that do the work in seconds, but for a long time it was all just muscle and a very sharp edge. Are you thinking about trying some woodworking yourself?
How did forests support early civilizations?
They were basically an all in one survival kit. Beyond just providing wood for building and fire, forests were the primary source of food. Think wild fruits, nuts, and game. They also acted as a natural shield against wind and extreme weather. And they kept the soil healthy, which made the surrounding land better for the early farms we were talking about. Without the forests, those first settlements wouldn't have had the resources to actually get off the ground. Do you think we've lost that connection to
Okay,
how
so
the
the
land
next
actually
question.
provides?
The next question is that what is timber?
Exactly. We've mostly traded that direct connection for convenience. Now we just go to a store and buy a piece of furniture or a bag of food without ever thinking about the forest or the soil it actually came from. It's a bit wild when you think about how those early civilizations viewed the land as this living, breathing provider, while for us, it's often just the outdoors. Do you think that distance makes us less
Okay,
likely
so
to
the next
protect?
question is that one final and last question is that why is wood often called the backbone of early civilization?
It's because wood was the one thing that made everything else possible. Think about it. It was the fuel for their fires, the frame for their homes, the hull of their ships, and the edge of their tools. It wasn't just one resource, it was the foundation for almost every single technological leap they made, from agriculture to trade. Without it, they wouldn't have had the stability or the tools to build the cities and systems